This week we are looking at myths. And so the title of this presentation, the title of this week is going to be Myths, Stories of Who We Are. So when we think about mythological stories, characters, figures, they're often embellishments of the natural individual. It's either something that we see in ourselves, something that we hope to be, or really want to accomplish in life, or a power that we want to have. And so, myths play a huge role in humanity, society, and cultures. So let's dive into it. What are myths? If we're going to come up with a definition, we're going to come up with a descriptor. How might we describe it? Well, myths are ancient narratives that have been passed down through generations. They encompass stories of gods, heroes, monsters, and extraordinary events. Myths offer insight into the culture, moral, and philosophical beliefs of a society. And often when we think about myths, we go back to the mythological figures of days past. Primarily, we go into ancient Greece and the Greek gods. They were mythological figures. And, you would have someone like Zeus or Olympus, and they would have certain characteristics, attributes, they would be gods in that culture, in that time. We have a hard time really understanding this because we don't really have a belief system that comes up with mythological figures and gods. We have our tall tales. In America, uh, particularly the West and the ancient uh, West, you would have someone like John Henry working on the railroad and being able to sling a sledgehammer, and with one shot of that sledgehammer drive a spike into the railroad tie. Or Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. So you have those tall tales, and sometimes we have people that we raise to mythological heights and ascribe certain attributes to them that they probably did not have, and most likely did not have. So sometimes it's hard for us to kind of understand this and come up really with a definition. But this is what we can understand as what a myth is. Now, myths are powerful, and they can shape a culture, they can shape a people. And so when we're talking about the power of myths, well, a myth or myths hold the power of the power to illuminate the human experience. They explore fundamental questions about the origins of the universe, purpose of life, the nature of good and evil. Myths transcend time and culture, connecting us to our shared human heritage. Usually, when you come to a conversation about myths, uh, you will look at ancient societies and what went on in them. And there's a lot of things that you can dive into and a lot of things that you can explore. And even when you explore multiple cultures, you see commonalities that come across. Um, One of the things that you will find if you study the Old Testament is the flood narrative. Well, there are multiple narratives of the flood in ancient civilizations. You know, even ancient civilizations in Middle America, Central America, like uh, the Mayans, have their own version of this story. Now, I don't want to lower a standard of saying that the ancient, the Old Testament is talking about a myth, but it is talking about something that is mythological in that it is substantial not only to the culture of ancient Israel, but also to all cultures all over the world, because these ancient cultures have a common story, a common event. Now, they're going to tell it a different way, and they're going to ascribe the power of this event to different deities. But nevertheless, there's a connection being made to a shared human heritage because this happened globally and there was a connection. So they do hold power and they do have something to them. So there is power in these myths. So you explore common themes when we're talking about these mythological things. So myths often revolve around universal themes such as creation, heroism, love, and the eternal struggle between opposing forces. These themes reflect the collective aspirations, fears, and values, our collective aspirations, fears, and values. So, universal themes, even I've talked about that. The flood narrative in the Old Testament. Well, you can find other places. There are other cultures who have ways of explaining the creation of all things or the creation of life. Um, we have our heroes. And, when you read in ancient Greek mythology about Hercules, and then you read the story of Samson in the Bible, I'm not saying and trying to downplay um, Samson at all, but it's hard not to see the commonalities between the two when you know both stories. There are common themes that run through uh, mythology. There are common themes that run through truth, and they are part of who we are, after all. So sometimes there's variations. Different cultures have distinct mythologies shaped by their history, geography, and worldview. Cultural variations in myths provide a window into how society perceives their relationship with the divine, nature, and each other. So if you were go, into medieval Germany and you would dive into um, that culture, you would find them talking about things that go on in the woods, things like goblins and trolls. And we look back at that and we say, well, they were crazy, but other societies had goblins and trolls just by different names. Um, and even cultures now that that have different things that they worship, um, part of their cultural heritage. One of the things that I find very fascinating is how each culture views snakes. Um, some worship them and hold them in high regard, but some despise them and want to get rid of them. I mean, you have, even in Ireland, right? You have the Pied Piper getting rid of all the snakes. Why there's no snakes in Ireland? Well, they were driven out. How did that actually happen? Oh, there were never any snakes in Ireland. But you have a cultural variation on why there was not snakes in Ireland. Um, so there are variations in these myths from one culture to another. As far as myths in ancient civilizations like the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Norse, they developed intricate mythologies that served as a framework for understanding the world. These myths influence societal norms, rituals, art, and uh, they had a lasting impact on those cultures. So, like with the Greeks, you had the Grecian gods. I think it's about someone like Zeus, and then you had the Egyptians. Really, the Egyptians, the pharaohs themselves were gods, and so you would have uh, someone who rises to power like Ramses, and Ramses is viewed as a god. And in the Norse mythology, and you really get to this even in popular culture now with Thor and Odin and Loki. These are ancient Norse gods, and they even have their place in society now. Now, Marvel has the corner on them, but these gods, in quotation marks, helped those people understand their world. And those myths shaped those civilizations. Now, myths in modern culture. Do we have myths in modern culture? And yes, we do. We have mythological themes that continue to thrive in modern literature, movies, and popular culture. These narratives resonate with contemporary audiences, illustrating how myths remain relevant and adaptable across time. And they do. Um, why do we love superhero movies? We love superhero movies because we love the superhuman. And the superhuman is mythical. We're ascribing to our quote unquote gods human characteristics. So they are gods in human form. Superman, he is in human form. He is a god. Yes, he may come from a different planet, um, but he's godlike nonetheless. He has these powers that we wish we had. Again, back to the Marvel movies with those ancient gods strewn in, but then you also have like a modern god like a Bruce Banner who can turn himself into the Incredible Hulk through a modern process of gamma radiation. In comic books, I'm not a big comic book person, but a lot of this is found in our society today. It's myths in modern culture. And so it's always here with us. What's the psychological significance of this? Well, myths delve into the depths of the human psyche, revealing collective fears, desires, and archetypes. They offer a philosophical or psychological lens through which we can explore our own motives and inner conflicts. I'm said I'm not a huge comic book fan, um, but I do like the Marvel movies, and I do like the DC movies, and of course, probably my favorite character is Batman. Batman is not a superhuman at all, but you know, Batman has wealth, and he's born in tragedy after his parents have been murdered, and he becomes. I mean, if you look through Christopher Nolan's Batman, you with Christian Bale, you see the development of the Batman character. Of course, my favorite Batman of all time is Michael Keaton, uh, which is the only Batman, right? But you see how he's developed. You see that he is an archetype. It's this collective fear and desire to clean up everything, to make the wrongs right, and these inner conflicts that go on within him. And so it speaks to us. We have these inner conflicts. We have these desires. We have these fears. And so we can connect with our mythological figures that we create. How about myths and identity? Well, myths often reflect the values and identities of cultures and individuals. People connect with myths that mirror their personal experience, helping to shape their sense of self and belonging. So, if you dive into these modern characters, why is there so many different ones? Looking at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's so many different characters, and everybody can connect to at least one of them. Uh, but that's something that's not new to our culture. That's something that's been in culture for quite some time. Uh, and that was the way that people entertained themselves in the ancient world, and this is how we entertain ourselves today. There's not really much difference between us and ancient humans, other than now the abundance that we do live in comparison to them. But we still like to entertain ourselves with the same thing because they speak these myths to who we are and help us to cope when we see someone who reflects us but who is greater and the obstacles that they overcome. So, what are some lessons from myths? Myths are repositories of moral and ethical lessons. They provide guidance on how to navigate challenges, make ethical choices, and overcome adversity. These lessons offer timeless wisdom for our human journey. Uh, Again, I don't want to equate and say that these are myths when I'm speaking of um, religion, but there are things that overlap, and so one of the things that we can understand is having the small overcome the greater. And that's what you see when you look at David in the Old Testament slaying the giant from Gath, Goliath. And so it's the lesser overcoming the greater. It's the young shepherd boy overcoming this great warrior giant and slaying him with just a sling and a stone. And then you look at all the modern movies where these things take place. I mean, you have someone who is of a lesser character, maybe someone like a Peter Parker, who becomes Spider-Man and defeats Doc Ock. It's a larger foe that this smaller boy is fighting. I mean, don't you see? Here are the same things playing out in culture after culture after culture. Um, these mythological things to help us navigate the challenges that we face and help us to make ethical decisions and help us to overcome adversity. So there are great lessons that can be learned from these. Also, when you deal with myths, you deal with mythological creatures and gods. So myths are populated by a diverse array of gods, goddesses, and mythical creatures. These entities embody human virtues, flaws, and aspirations. They offer a symbolic representation of the human condition. And so this is what you see um, when you have, mythological creatures, and we may not look back into the past and deal with those things, but even in our myths in modern age, you have even someone like the character Harry Potter overcoming mythical creatures in order to win, to be the victor. Uh, and so you see those common themes throughout ancient tales, and you see occurrences of mythical creatures being overcome and magical circumstances. And so this is part of us, but it's that sometimes these creatures even embody human virtues, flaws, and aspirations, offering symbolic representations of the human condition. And of course, there are global impacts of myths. The myths transcend global boundaries, fostering connection between diverse societies. Shared mythological motifs and symbols illustrate the interconnectedness of humanity and our shared quest for meaning. In the modern age, there are entire conferences, conventions that are shaped around Star Wars, shaped around Star Trek, shaped around any transcendent idea. And you see people from all different cultures who connect with these things, and they come together, and they may not speak the same language, but when it comes down to it, they all have a shared experience, and in that they speak the same language. So myths bring us together in a sense. So they do have a global impact. All right, so if I asked any discussion questions from this section, you might find these. Um, how do myths reflect the values of a society? Can myths from different cultures share similar themes, and why? How have myths influenced modern storytelling? Um, what role do you think myths play in shaping individual identities? How might the study of myths enhance our understanding of history and culture? And then share your favorite myth and explain why it's significant to you. So those are some things to think about. Those are some things to go through. Um, Always, if you need to get a hold of me, please just email me, jrwilliams at gadsdenstate.edu. Thank you and have a wonderful week.